Football is back. Christmas is done and the transfer window is approaching, and yet the links remain relatively sparse. We're going to hope for change over the next few days and weeks, but we're going to continue to bring you this coverage in the Arsenal Transfer Show. Hello and welcome to the Gooner Talk, back again with you guys and girls for another episode of what is the Arsenal Transfer Show. Join you every morning at 8 a.m. UK time on Boxing Day, of course, today, which means it's kind of like here in the UK, sports day. So much sport going on Boxing Day, particularly football all around the country. Plenty of games happening and going on, except for Arsenal, who, of course, take their game against Ipswich tomorrow. We'll talk about the Premier League games very shortly, of course, but good morning to those joining us live in the chat box today. Very much appreciate you all being here. Thank you so much as always for tuning in. It is incredibly humbling to see you. Peekahoo, Black Shine, Shari. We've got Paul and other Paul and Stevie and John and Carlton and Lee, Matt G. We've got Jitty and Granddaddy Gooner Paul and Zoom, Steve, Black Shine, Mohammed, Maximius, Gooner 76, and plenty more of you guys and girls in the chat box as well. Thank you for tuning in. I hope you have an absolutely fantastic, or rather have had a absolutely fantastic Christmas day. I hope plenty of family time was had, food was eaten, and games were enjoyed, movies watched, TV witnessed. For those of you who watched yesterday, a couple of highlights on British TV yesterday, of course, Wallace and Gromit, stunning return of Feathers McCraw. And, of course, in the evening, a Gavin and Stacey finale, which certainly did not disappoint either. So really, really good stuff. A good Christmas day. I managed to get, with the help of the wife, I say with the help, she carried most of the burden. To be fair, we did a lot of prep together, but I hosted more than I did the cooking, I think, in the end. But we're still together, pulled together a fantastic meal, I think. Which was also really, really good. I have got the wrong microphone selected. Thank you for those that have pointed it out. That now should be much, much better. I don't know why. It's because when it comes through the microphone, for some reason, it never comes through here. So if it does come through here, I assume that it is coming through the microphone, but it's not. It's coming through the right one now. So hopefully the audio is back and perfect for you. But yes, Christmas was good, all was well. And not only that, but we managed to hit 60,704 subscribers. In fact, we went well past that yesterday. Thank you to everybody for showing your support on the channel. It means the absolute world to those that have. It means that by Christmas, we managed to hit our target of reaching the Emirates Stadium capacity in subscribers for the channel, which is brilliant. So thank you so much for everybody that's helped grow this community to where we find it today. It's very humbling indeed. Now, I've been going on for 3 minutes. We're going to get the negative Nellies moaning about how long my intros are. So let's jump into today's stories, and we start with a roundup of the Premier League fixtures taken on today, all of them being shown, of course, on Amazon. It is an Amazon day for broadcasting. The early kickoff, 12:30 at the Etihad, Manchester City against Everton. Can Man City finally put an end to their horrendous run against a relegation-threatened team? Well, Everton have got draws against both Arsenal and Chelsea in recent weeks. Let's see if they can get one against Man City. Bournemouth take on Crystal Palace. That's an intriguing game. Bournemouth, of course, really threatening those European places this season. Meanwhile, a West London derby as Chelsea take on Fulham at Stamford Bridge. Newcastle taking on Aston Villa. That's another really entertaining match as well. Nottingham Forest taking on Tottenham at a 3 o'clock kickoff. All these 3 o'clocks being shown, by the way. Very rare that we see these 3 o'clock games kicked off, but it is Thursday, so we haven't got the usual weekend embargo. Southampton take on West Ham in a really important relegation fight. Wolves take on Manchester United. Another chance for both Southampton and Wolves' new managers to get their feet under the desk a bit more. And the late kickoff today is Liverpool against Leicester at 8 o'clock tonight. I'm not expecting Leicester to do Arsenal any favours here today, so don't get your hopes up. All the intention is going to be on Arsenal and getting their own job done. Arsenal against Ipswich is tomorrow at 8:15. Silly kickoff time, but it is what it is. Brighton taking on Brentford at 7:30, 45 minutes before the Arsenal game kicks off. But yes, Arsenal Ipswich tomorrow. We'll have more of a preview view of that game in tomorrow morning's show. Ayden Heaven is said to be in talks with Arsenal over a brand new deal. We've known that there are discussions that have been going on for quite some time. It's Simon Collins of the Evening Standard reporting that quite a fair few months ago. Fabrizio Romano providing this update yesterday. Talented, of course, defender, a player that Arsenal and Arteta have given minutes to at a senior level as well, but so far he is yet to commit to a brand new contract with Arsenal, but he has received minutes. He played in the EFL Cup. He came on off the bench in the game earlier on this season for Arsenal against Preston towards the end of that match as well. So there has been opportunity in the first team, but he is still very much seen as further down the pecking order. He's been playing in the UEFA Youth League. He's been playing for, of course, the Premier League 2 squad as well. He's been on the bench 3 times in the Premier League this season, but so far no appearances in the Premier League, nor in anything other than the League Cup for Ayden Heaven. But very talented player. There's said to be interest from Ajax and also Borussia Dortmund as well in the player, but he is yet to commit his future to the club. And the headline story of the day as well, coming from Fabrizio Romano, is that Kolo Muani, Randal Kolo Muani, is guaranteed, effectively. That is the feeling, that he will leave PSG in the January transfer window. Arsenal, Tottenham, Liverpool, Manchester United, some other clubs on the continent have all been alerted to the availability of Randal Kolo Muani. It could be that he leaves on loan during this window, but there has been some kind of debate around the Premier League loan rules. I know yesterday we talked about how clubs in the UK are only allowed 2 loans, but there's been some confusing kind of text in the reading. And so I thought I'd do some digging into kind of what Premier League clubs have done this season to give us a bit of an insight, and that might tell us the evidence that we need to kind of clear this up. And I did look through every single Premier League club, and no more than 2 players have been loaned in by any Premier League team this season. Arsenal, of course, have brought in Neto and Sterling this season. Aston Villa have currently got no players in a senior position on loan at this point in time. We have seen loads of players loaned out more than 2, but not come in more than 2. Kepa Arrizabalaga is on loan at Bournemouth this season. At Brentford, there are currently no players on loan in West London there. We don't see any loan players at Brighton this season. Chelsea have loaned in Jadon Sancho, of course, from Manchester United, but there is an obligation to buy clause in that deal at the end of the campaign. Crystal Palace have loaned in Matt Turner and Trevor Chalobah during this campaign. Everton have loaned in Armando Broja from Chelsea and Oral Mangala from Lyon. Fulham have loaned in Reece Nelson, as we know, of course, from Arsenal, but that is it so far. Ipswich Town have loaned in Jens Kajusta from Napoli, but they've also brought in Calvin Phillips from Manchester City, but that is it. No more loans to their senior squad. Leicester have loaned in Facundo Buonanotte from Brighton and Odsonne Edouard from Chelsea, but can't say we've seen too much of Edouard this season. Liverpool haven't got any player on loan so far this campaign. Manchester City have not signed any players on loan during this season. Manchester United neither have signed any players on loan. Newcastle United have not brought in any players on loan. Nottingham Forest, the kings of transfers. If you were looking for a side that you would think that would be able to break that ruling or see that they might give an indication that they've signed any players on loan, nope. They've got James Ward-Prowse from West Ham and Alex Moreno from Aston Villa, both loan deals, but no more than that. Southampton have got 2 loan players as well. Maxwell Cornet from West Ham and Leslie Ugochukwu from Chelsea are also on loan. Spurs, no loan players there. West Ham have got Jean-Claire Todibo from Nice and Carlos Soler from PSG, currently on loan at the moment at the club. And Wolves, well, they've got Jurgen Strand-Larsen and Carlos Forbes on loan this season. So it appears that indeed 2 loans are all that is allowed at every single club, be that from another Premier League side, be that from any other club, because, of course, you've seen there that there are international loans going into those clubs that have still seen them not expand beyond those 2 loan players. So hopefully that gives us a little bit of an indication, more of a clarity around that. So if Arsenal, it appears, want to sign Kolo Muani on loan, they will need to cancel one of the loans for Neto or for Raheem Sterling during this window, which is not an easy thing to do. You might think it's just like, oh, let's just agree to cancel that loan deal. If there's a loan break clause in those loans, break clauses are only accessible by the team that have loaned the player to the club unless stated otherwise in the contract. And usually when you want to end a loan as the team that have loaned the player, you need to come to an agreement with all of those parties to be able to get that loan cancelled. So I'm not expecting Arsenal to go in for Kolo Muani on loan. I think that would be very, very surprising indeed. Right, let's go to part 2 and your questions, shall we? Right, after this. Right, let's jump into the chat box, shall we, and tackle some of your thoughts, feelings, queries, and questions. Make sure you drop a like of the video. Of course, subscribe to the channel if you're new around here with those notifications turned on so you never miss a show. AFC Till I Die says, Tom, hey, can I do a shout out to everyone like me and my partner that worked Christmas Day? So we are having our Christmas Day today instead. So happy Christmas Day and Boxing Day to all of you. Come on, you Gooners. Of course you can. And I've said before, like, absolute respect for those working on Christmas Day. Of course, our brilliant NHS workers have been doing all of that, and loads and plenty of other outlets and businesses as well, also working on Christmas Day, and very much appreciate you still being here with us, AFC Till I Die, and throwing it in. Maximus says, what a waste of the loan capacity. Neither Sterling nor Neto would get anywhere near our first team, let alone for a top 4 team. Clearly, this has been bad foresight. I would ask that rarely do you see any teams loan a player at this level that gets anywhere near the first team. I would preface, it's very rare that this happens. And I'm not talking about loans with obligations to buy, because they're basically transfers. So I'm not sure that loans are ever too much of an indication about how successful the planning is behind the scenes for transfers. Loans tend to be needs musts, and that's what both of those loans were for Arsenal. It got to deadline day, they didn't have the money available, ready and ripe, and raring to go, because they had to bring in money on the last day of the window. They held firm on their valuations for players. There was a lot of criticism that Arsenal weren't selling well enough, and they waited until the final day of the window, of course, to stand firm on those prices, and got those prices for those players in Ramsdale and in Nketiah. But by the time you get to deadline day, you're not going to be able to go into the market and spend that money on that period. And so therefore it's going to get pushed, we hope, at least to this window. But where do you see kind of clubs bringing in competitive first team options with loans? I mean, feel free to let me know any examples, but rarely, I would preface, does that happen. With Emre maybe says, hello from Istanbul, happy holidays. How serious is Arsenal for Kolo Muani? Do you think Galatasaray would loan him, or do you think Arsenal would get him? I'd bank more on Galatasaray getting him than Arsenal right now, but there are a lot of other teams bigger than Galatasaray that are looking at the player. John says, yes, Tom, thank you. I was thinking the exact same. Read the loans. Matt G says, there's no way Chelsea would let us cancel Sterling's loan. They won't help their competition. Which is certainly a fair point as well. I'm going to scroll up a little bit more in the chat box as well. Fizzy says 100k subs by the start of next season. I mean, that's a pipe dream, but you never know. This YouTube space is a wonderful and weird, wacky world as well. And good afternoon, good morning, good evening to wherever you happen to be. Of course, everybody else. I can see plenty of your messages from the start of the show as well. Lloyd says, some of our fans are going crazy with the loss of Saka. Who can we play there as cover till he comes back? For me, it could be Waneri. He's got the skill. He's got the talent to help. I think, of course, Martinelli will probably start there. I think that we might see Waneri brought on off the bench and given opportunities to cover towards the latter stages of games to see if we can give him as well. Jorgen says, let's go and get Osimhen and swap him with Sterling. It's easier said than done, that. Paul says, I'm late watching from the start. Happy Boxing Day, everyone. Thanks for the content throughout the festive period. The Red One was a fun watch as well. Thank you, Paul. Very much appreciate it. Red One, of course. A lot of people saying Red One was good. Haven't watched it myself. Anne says we did it with Ødegaard. Has that spoiled us in regards to thinking that we can find something similar in the loan market? It's worth pointing out that when we did sign Martin Ødegaard on loan, Arsenal weren't competing for the title. Arsenal were not in that position during that season. And so I'm talking here about teams that are at the top table of this league, competing for a league title. When do they sign players on loan? Man City, if we look at Man City's track record of transfers, I'd be curious to know the last time that Man City even loaned a player in to the club. Be very interested to see. I'm looking down the list right now. Last time Man City loaned a player was, goodness me, I'm going to go a long way down. Still going. We're in 2019. Scott Carson from Derby was the last time Man City loaned a player into the club. That was in 2019. And then I'm going back even further to find the next one. Back further, 2014, they signed Frank Lampard on loan from New York City FC. So it's, as I say, it's not like it's that common. Liverpool, having a quick look at the next best team in the league over the last 6 years. The last loan player they signed was in 2022. Arthur Melo joined from Juventus on loan, barely ever played, was injured quite a lot. Going back a bit further, Ozan Kabak, do you remember him? Centre-back from Schalke, barely ever played, didn't compete with those centre-halves for Liverpool. Going back even further, when was that? Stephen Kulka, wow, from QPR. Remember Stephen Kulka? What is Stephen Kulka doing these days? 2015 to Liverpool on loan. He's currently playing for Turkish side. Can't say I've ever even heard of them. Ankara Keçiörengucu is the club that Stephen Kulka currently plays for at the ripe age of 32. Currently there. So you kind of see what I mean. Teams at the top end of the table aren't doing it. And I said teams that have those options and obligations to buy, they're not really the same. Derek says David Raya alone. It's not an example because it was a player that Arsenal would sign at the end of that season. So that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about straight loan deals, players that are, that you're not looking or have that obligation like we're seeing with some other teams. But like Jadon Sancho at Chelsea this season as an example, David Raya last season at Arsenal. We're looking at players, of course, that have been on loan that are just loans, and this idea that you can bring players on loan to a team that's competing for the title and see them get anywhere near close to, the competitive starting options of the team. Aziz says, Tom, if we buy a player in January, how does it work with registration for the Premier League? Do we need to kick out a recently registered player from our squad? How many can we register in total? It's a good question to ask. Arsenal can have a 25-man squad, as we know this, and 17 of those players can be homegrown. Okay, there is no homegrown quota, as I like to point out to you always. There is only a non-homegrown quota, of which you are allowed 17 non-homegrown players. Now, count with me. Arsenal's current roster of non-homegrown players are Neto, Kieran Tierney, Gabriel, Jurian Timber, Jakub Kivior, Alexander Zinchenko, Takira Tomiyasu, Ricardo Calafiori, Thomas Partey, Martin Odegaard, that's 10, Jorginho, Mikel Merino, Gabriel Jesus, Leandro Trossard, and Kai Havertz. That is the 15 non-homegrown players we have. Of course, Gabriel Martinelli and William Saliba have been at the club since they were 18. They spent 3 seasons at Arsenal before they turned 21, and so therefore they count as homegrown players for the squad. So that's, I guess, a positive. We've still got some space in the group, but it's also worth pointing out in the Champions League, those rules are slightly different. So that's really important. John says, you're talking rubbish, Tom. We should never have signed Sterling and Neto and just got Cole Palmer and Haaland on loan. Merry Christmas. Indeed. Other John says, if we'd have left the loan spots free, we'd have been even lighter than we are now. Neto and Sterling were both bought in to bolster the ranks and not to be starters. I mean, literally, they were last-minute deals because we needed a forward. We needed to bring in a backup goalkeeper. We weren't willing to spend 20 million plus on Jean Garcia at the end of the window, so we went and got Neto on a free. Rob says, as Nelson is injured, could we see us bringing him back, paying his injured wages to free up a loan? I very much doubt it, Rob. I don't think Arsenal or Nelson are interested in that. Nelson asked to leave the club at the end of the summer window, and Arsenal were more than happy to facilitate that. So I very much doubt it. Oliver says, will any of them qualify for homegrown in a few years' time? No, none of them. The reason why none of them will is because none of them will be at the club for 3 seasons before the age of 21. So you will not see any of the players that we just talked about there become homegrown. You can only become homegrown if you've been at a club in England for 3 seasons before the age of 21. David Raya, of course, being one of those as well. Is another Spanish international, but does count as homegrown in the squad as well. Saim says, doesn't Tierney count? Why would Tierney count as homegrown? He's Scottish. And he certainly wasn't at an English club before the age of 21 for 3 seasons. So no, Tierney is not homegrown. Only counts English players, not Scottish players. I think that Welsh players maybe count. Welsh homegrown Premier League. I could be wrong. Yes, a player is classed as homegrown if he was registered for an English or Welsh club for 3 years before the age of 21. So Aaron Ramsey was indeed a homegrown player, but Scottish players don't. Welsh players do. Scottish players don't ask me why. I've absolutely no idea, but maybe it's something to do with the fact that Welsh teams can, of course, play in English leagues. Cardiff City, Swansea City, Welsh teams are in the English leagues, whereas Scottish teams are not. So I guess that makes sense, actually, when you think of it that way, because there are Welsh teams in those English leagues. Maximius says, Tom, looking at Sterling from last year, how probable were you to sign him up on loan, basically Sterling or bust, or keep the slot free for the winter window? You can cancel loan deals, but at the end of the window, Arsenal had to bring in a forward player. I wasn't the biggest fan of the idea, but we absolutely had to sign a forward because we had to make sure there was depth. We were losing Nelson. We'd lost Smith Rowe. We were losing Vieira. I think Arsenal had to go and add something to the team. So it had to be a loan player. Maybe Sterling wasn't the best option, but I don't really see who else you could have got. And I think that's the question. It's all well and good us looking back with the benefit of hindsight now, but I think it's all about the needs and the musts in that moment. And I hope that we can cancel that loan deal in January, but it seems very, very difficult to do. Tom says, we were laughing at Chelsea when we signed Sterling and they had to pay his wages. Now they are laughing because we have no choice but keeping him and not being able to bring in a loan player that we want. Again, I just don't think that if Arsenal's season is riding on a loan deal and that loan move is being so heavily scrutinised, I just don't get it. Because as pointed out to you, teams that win the league are not winning the league because of the players that they bring in on loan. They're just not. So these are like needs must things, situations where opportunities arise and we have to go and add numbers. A backup goalkeeper is definitely one of those. And with the players that we'd lost in the forward line and not been able to bring in the money until deadline day, of course Arsenal were going to go and sign a player if they could do on loan, and they wanted to. They saw Sterling as an opportunity. It's not necessarily paid off, especially with the injury that he's now suffered. Oliver Young says all of the UK should count. Should it? Because as I've pointed out, the Scottish League is a different league. It's separate to the English and Welsh clubs. So I'm not necessarily sure if it should. If it was to be merged, then maybe, but I don't ever see that happening. But yeah, it's why you can't have those homegrown players, because they're separate leagues, and that's why. Any updates on Vieira's loan spell? Vieira's been doing okay. He's been doing all right. I think he's getting enough minutes. There was, of course, some conversations about how many minutes he had to play for Porto during the season, and he was injured at the beginning of the campaign. But now he's successfully started their last 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Their last 8 league games he has started. In those 8 games, got a goal and 2 assists. He started their last 2 Portuguese Cup games as well, as Porto were eliminated actually against Moreirense. So, but yeah, he's starting games, he's playing games, and that's what we need him to do. We just need to keep playing him. So we can try and get maximum value next summer when he is eventually sold. Captain Presence says, how is Moussa Diaby? Of course, the player that left Aston Villa to join Al Ittihad in Saudi Arabia. He scored 1 goal in 10 games, but he does have 10 assists, to be fair, which is pretty good. 10 assists. He got 4 of those in 1 game in a 7-1 win over Al Weda. and then went on to get assists in the next 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 successive games after that. Scored in a 3-1 win over Al Qadsiya. But yeah, he starts and finishes every single game, but he's currently now out injured at the moment. So yeah, that gives you all the information you need to know about that. He's playing in a team, of course, with is it Karim Benzema? I think plays for Al Ittihad as well. Or is it somebody else? I'll be very honest. I'm not 100% sure. I don't think it is. Yeah, it's Karim Benzema. Yes, Karim Benzema. Moussa Diaby. Anyone else we know of? Danilo Pereira. Steven Bergwijn. Goodness me. All these players. Steven Bergwijn's only 27. Oh dear. Moussa Diaby's only 25. It's scary, isn't it? I mean, it's just completely lost into the ether now. Like these players that just careers are, you're getting a lot of money, but I think the Saudi league is kind of like, it peaked, didn't it, in the early points where it was getting those big players, and I know they're going for younger players now, but it's not exactly great. I think the FIFA are trying to help it in some ways with the expansion of the Club World Cup, but I don't know what it's going to do, really. Maxime says, I would take Kolo Muani at Arsenal, by the way. I liked what I saw of him at the Qatar World Cup. Oliver says, I love the UK league system and how many clubs there are, but it makes it more difficult to fast track as much talent as possible, so I wouldn't mind seeing them merged somewhat. Antonio says, Tom, why do you think Kolo Muani would, could be a perfect candidate for the striker position for Arsenal? I don't think I have said that, Antonio. I don't think Kolo Muani would be the perfect example at all. I think, in fact, he'd be a massive risk. I think it's a case of like, if you could sign him or no one, a bit like the Sterling situation in the summer, I'd be keen on that. But he's not had the best of seasons with he's not had the best of times with PSG. You know, last season he's got 2 goals and 1 assist in 10 games this season. Last season he got 6 goals and 5 assists in 26 games. But it was that season at Frankfurt where, of course, he scored 15 goals and got 14 assists, 23 goals and 17 assists in 46 games for Frankfurt in 22-23. But he's never been able to replicate that at Arsenal. He looked like a very intriguing player back then. And similar to Marmoush as well at Frankfurt right now. It's, do you take a risk on a player that's doing really, really well? It's hard to justify that. It's really hard to justify that. So I don't think he'd be the perfect option for us in January at all. And at the moment, we can't even sign him because of the loan rules situation. Peter says, I've heard that Arsenal have contacted Mbeumo. Where did you hear that, Peter? I'd love to know what your source is for that information, because certainly I've heard nothing to suggest that from an accurate place. Stephen says, why do Cardiff and Swansea playing in English leagues and not the Welsh league? I don't know. Why do Cardiff and Swansea play in England? The clubs were established before the Welsh Football League was formed in 1992. The English Premier League has much higher broadcasting revenue. These are all AI answers online. I should probably go to goal.com, who say Swansea, along with Cardiff, Newport County, Wrexham and Merthyr Town all play in the English Football League, as when they were first formed, no Welsh Football League had existed, and so their only option was to join the English Football League. Cardiff doing so in 1920 and Swansea doing so in 1921, and have been both playing ever since. Though a Welsh Premier League, also known as the Cymru Premier, was formed in 1992, the above clubs wished to remain playing in the England Football Pyramid at the time. Cardiff and Swansea and Newport all compete in the English Football League system and are all allowed to compete in the FA Cup, an English tournament. They used to be under the administration of the Football Association of Wales up until 2012, though their disciplinary functions are now handled by the English FA. So there you go. A pretty simple answer, it turns out, because the league was formed well after the clubs were formed. So they've always been part of the English league. Let's go to Mohammed says, I watched the Saudi League and Diaby is absolutely the best player in it right now. Elliot says, in my opinion, if Arsenal are to win the league, we need to buy it, not loan players of difference this window, or seek out cup wins to see any sort of success. I am absolutely in agreement. I think that for Arsenal to win the league, I think they are going to have to buy some players in January. If we don't buy players, I think our ability to win the league is going to be significantly hampered. And we absolutely need to do it. Akubra says, since we hardly spend in the winter transfer window, could Reece loan be cut short? This idea that Arsenal don't spend, by the way, in the January transfer window, it's not true. There are windows that we don't, for sure. But this idea that Arsenal never spend in January is not the case. Of course, during the last time Arsenal spent in January, of course, was not last season, was in 2022. We spent around £60 million on Trossard, on Kivior, and on Jorginho. The season before that, they only signed one player, which was Austin Trusty, of course. The season before that, Arsenal loaned in 2 players, Martin Odegaard, which cost them money to do so. Quite a significant loan player as well, of course. One of the very few examples, I think, of a player, but Arsenal did end up signing him, of course, at the end of that loan. Matthew Ryan was the other loan deal. In 2019, Arsenal signed Pablo Mari on a loan to buy option, which was around £10 million at the time. And Cedric Suarez, of course, came in on loan as well. In 2018, Denis Suarez, you remember, came in. The season before that, Arsenal spent a huge amount of money bringing in Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang on loan and doing a swap deal with Alexis Sanchez and Henrik Mkhitaryan. They didn't spend any money in the January of 2016, and in 2015 they brought in Mohamed El Neni from Basel during that window. We're really going back to kind of the lesser spending years of Arsenal in general. The year before, 2014, Gabriel Paulista and Christian Bielik were signed in January. The year before that was the infamous Kim Kallstrom year, and the year before that was Nacho Monreal. So Arsenal have spent in these January windows, not as much as what you'd see perhaps other clubs, but to be honest, big clubs like Arsenal, Man City, Liverpool, the big spending does not really happen in January because mainly the main stuff is done in the summer. But Arsenal need to spend in this window. Absolutely need to spend during this January transfer window. Joey says, I would stay away from Randal Kolo Muani. Question about how he left Frankfurt. Deleting posts and unfollowing the club to make a point seems a bit childish. John says, we have enough players to cover for Saka. The clamber for someone shiny and new is short-sighted and is how clubs like Man United have been operating in recent years. Daniel says, is there a good available option for a winger in the transfer window? I do think there are some players out there that Arsenal could look to, like a Kudus, like an Mbeumo, like a Semenyo, like a Jamie Gittins. I think these are all players that maybe should Arsenal be looking at. I think they should be looking at them. Are they realistic? That's the other question. I'm not sure how available they are, but they are players that I would like to see Arsenal consider during this window. Ant says, Tom, my concern at the moment is without Edu actively being involved with transfers, we're going to be held back somewhat because of the positive relationship he obviously had with other agents. I don't think his resignation means that agents won't be willing to work with Arsenal. I don't think that's how it works. I think if agents and intermediaries can get their clients to a club like Arsenal, can do a deal with Arsenal, they'd be more than happy to try and make that happen. I also think Edu left Arsenal in good circumstances, although it was a surprise. I don't think there's any bad blood between Edu and the club, to be honest. So I don't think there's any revenge stuff going on here or any bad blood at all. He left of his own volition. Arsenal offered him a competitive salary in response to that. He still wanted to go, to move on to a different role. I don't think there's any bad blood there whatsoever. But of course, there could be some impact of him not being here. But we do know, of course, that Jason Ato has taken over that role. We know there's a lot of people behind the scenes that, of course, do work on transfers that are not just Edu. So there is lots to think about. Laughing Man says we'll probably buy a defender. We need a defender as well. The irony is that we might laugh at the idea of defenders being signed, but Arsenal are short. Injuries to Tomiyasu, injury to Ben White. The Calafiori situation is not improving. The Zinchenko situation has not improved. Those players have had significant and numerous injuries that we've had to deal with. Gabriel has faced injuries this season. Lewis Skelly, of course, is mainly a midfielder, but is deputising at left back when need be. So it might be funny, and I'd rather sign a forward, but a defender is definitely someone that still should be on the cards for Arsenal potentially in the window because we have needs there as well. MD says, though, we do not need to spend. We have enough players. Come on, the injuries will pass, and then what happens with the new shiny new toys as well? I just think, yes, injuries can pass, but they can also return. They can also get worse. I think you need to be prepared for that. You absolutely do. PJ says, morning, Tom. It's my 16th anniversary today. Happy Boxing Day as well. Massive congratulations to you and yours, PJ. I hope you have an absolutely fantastic one. And I think we'll end the show on that positive note. I'll be back with you, of course, tomorrow morning to preview Arsenal's game against Ipswich. We'll have a roundup of all of the occurrences from today's games in the Premier League as well. And I look forward, of course, to hearing and seeing plenty more of your comments in the comment section down below. Thank you so much for watching. Appreciate the support. As always, please stay safe, stay well, stay happy and respectful. And as always, up the Arsenal.